Hi there. This is my quick listing of what I felt were the top TV shows of 2024. Now, I say quick listing because originally I scripted out an over an hour long full podcast breaking down each of these in detail, giving mini reviews to ones that I haven't made specific video reviews on before. And I realized when I list them off at the end, it buries the lead. And on top of that, I came up with little awards for each one in their own category, like, well, this was the best animation, this was the best drama, that kind of thing. So I decided to record this first, cutting to the chase as sort of a short promo for the full podcast. So if you want my explanations behind all of these things, go on ahead and discuss this in the main video. Also, I don't believe in assigning rankings for things because the categories are also different. I mean, Shogun was a historical period drama, and Penguin is a comics-inspired crime noir. I don't think they are comparable philosophically. So my listing is just chronologically. Shogun happens to be the first one just because it came out very early in the year. But this is loosely a chronological list. It's not really ranked by anything. I will say, even I will admit that House of the Dragon Season 2 was not show of the year, but for people really hitting on it, like, I've looked at other top 10 lists before I made mine, and all of them consistently put House of the Dragon Season 2 around 7, 8, or 9 out of 10. And do note, we are aware it was affected by the writer's strike preventing rewrites and there were budget cuts. That isn't their fault. So, and we still had fun watching it. So yeah, it's like at the bottom of the top 10, but still in the top 10. These things happen. So the short version, just listing them off, and then the category by category things I did. Top shows of the year. And also, I don't believe in hitting an arbitrary number. If there were only 5 good shows, I'd say that. If there were 30 good shows, I'd list them all. As it stands, I have a list of 15 things. Because you could debate whether, well, does True Detective Night Country count as a miniseries, not a TV series? And the way I did it was, there's 2 animated projects by the same team in the same fictional universe, so I felt let's count those as one thing. Because I had 16, I'll cheat by counting those as one thing to get it down to 15, just to keep a manageable list with a nice round number. So technically it is the top 15, but here we go. Chronologically, remember. Shogun, Fallout, X-Men 97, and then the one I doubled up was, at the beginning of the year, Has Been Hotel came out on Amazon, which was just really innovative. It started out as an indie animation project, spinning off from Hell of a Boss, which is still purely YouTube, and then Hell of a Boss Season 2 just wrapped up in the fall, so I counted those as one thing because they are in the same fictional universe, but just seeing Has Been Hotel Season 1, which, like, the pilot came out in, 2019? And then just, wow, and all the fan theories based just on the pilot that turned out to be true, and just, it was a big fandom experience for people really into dissecting, media like that. And I listed this next, even though its release schedule was weird. Number 5 for me was The Amazing Digital Circus, which again is an indie animation done over YouTube, and the pilot came out last year, but then the 3 regular episodes came out this year, and just in terms of how innovative it is, and just, wow, a lot of meta commentary, thought, and ideas went into this VR animated thing. I just really like The Amazing Digital Circus. Number 6 is actually a documentary, Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV, which, remember, happened earlier in the year, and just, you need to see that. It's only 5 episodes, and just going over that it started out as a fan movement of just, well, we're trying to expose the bad behavior of these producers and the studios who were negligent. It reminds me of the campaigns against Joss Whedon. It's like, this is the stuff we aspire to have in Game of Thrones fandom, of that Dan Schneider was doing all of this, and it was in public. So many of the things he did were on video. That was really impactful, and like, taking into account of, it's not just that you did this, it's you did it so brazenly that no one was willing to call you to account before, because I'm this amazing producer, and then everyone in it was saying, he's really not. That's just, he takes credit for other people's work. Then number 7, this is the last of the spring schedule. Like I said, technically honorable mention to True Detective Night Country, which it wasn't that big of a lore thing, but just in terms of the cinematography and acting, it was really moody, and I really enjoyed watching it for the creepy vibes. Even if the story was just kind of, by numbers, it was still really nice, and I enjoyed it. Moving on to summer, number 8, and I haven't watched all of these. Some of them, one or two of them, are from reviewers I trust said something was still really good, and it was something. It's also not just top 15 objectively, but top 15 fueling internet discussion on YouTube. So, number 8 is Amazon's The Boys Season 4, which, Red Team Review and Preston Jacobs, they reviewed that. They really liked it. They said it was still consistently good. So, another reason I'm doing these top 10 lists is because of the fallow time we had in the aftermath of the strikes. That start of last year, I said these are the shows to look forward to, knowing first half of the year will be a little slim. And yeah, overall, a lot of shows got delayed. But there were still some really good, like Shogun came as a surprise. So The Boys Season 4 was something people were really looking forward to and still thought it was really good. Season 5 will be the end, but they'll make spin-offs. The Boys is number 8. House of the Dragon Season 2 is number 9. And then, because this is chronological, number 10 is Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power Season 2, which was drastically better because turns out Season 1 had problems because it was written to be a binge show. But due to long production turnover because of the pandemic, got released episodically, that ruined the pacing. Season 2, they wrote knowing it would be paced episodically, and it was drastically better, in terms of most improvement. And I'd say, relative to itself in terms of internal consistency, I'm humble enough to admit it was a better overall season than House of the Dragon Season 2. Technically, X-Men 97 was a better internally consistent season with beginning, middle, end, and overall quality than Season 2. But again, every reviewer that is actually a professional reviewer putting things out has said, we give them points because there was a strike, and we know it's not the writer's fault, or at least not most of it, and we had fun watching it. I mean, it's not The Acolyte. You may have noticed Acolyte is not on my list here. There were a lot of problems with Star Wars Acolyte, but no, there were strike problems on Season 2. I was pleasantly surprised at Lord of the Rings Season 2. I had hoped they'd get better because I said, I see there's potential here. They just need to refine some things. Unlike most, I had a nuanced response to Season 1 there's things you could improve that if you do, it'll be better, and they did, for once. That's the end of the summer season. Technically, Lord of the Rings came out very late August, spilling over into September. But the last 5 years, from more recent obvious things from fall, you'll remember more easily. Agatha All Along from Marvel, HBO's The Penguin, then Dune Prophecy right after that. That was a real surprise. I didn't expect it to be that good. Then Arcane Season 2, and finally Creature Commandos, which technically the season finale, again, is 2 days from now, but started in early December, counts as, I would still rank it one of the best shows of the year. I was really impressed with what James Gunn did with this. It really makes me feel better about the DC Comics universe that he's going to be rebooting. So how far am I along in this in the short version? About 9 minutes in. Again, this is the short version compared to like an hour and a half podcast where I do more in-depth comments on each of these, but I felt these were the best things of the year. So now we get into the little specific awards I came up with, because again, I don't know if you can compare some of these. Case in point, what was the series of the year? If you can say there was a single series of the year in format and category, comedy, drama, I would say The Penguin, based on a weighted score of overall quality combined with broad appeal. I think everyone should like Shogun, but it's this historical period drama set in Japan, a lot of archaic Japanese in it, versus it's a crime noir set in the Batman universe that anyone could watch The Penguin and get into it. And it's a basic crime noir, but it's done really, really well. And with homages to prior things in cinema and the French Connection. And you could debate that, but again, my point of view, can't really compare them. On the balance, I think Penguin, just because of its accessibility and the performances. And both of them were supposed to be one-shot miniseries, but they were so well received that they've both getting new season orders or discussing them for Penguin. So I didn't make a separate category in my list here for best period drama. If I did, Shogun would have won. But there's no competition. And on top of that, this is going by calendar year, like the Golden Globes were this past weekend. Golden Globes goes by calendar year, January 1st to December 31st. And Shogun swept the awards. Thankfully, Penguin was still categorized as a miniseries, so they won anyway for Best Miniseries and Best Actor because they were in a different category. The fun we have with categories. But the Emmy Awards, the annual cutoff is in May. So Shogun swept the last Emmys. Penguin might be in a different category at the next Emmys if they decide to play up. Who knows? So as a hard choice between Shogun and Penguin, and mostly because, well, Shogun was very early in the year and it kind of already had its moment in the sun, in terms of what you can achieve with a live-action DC Comics TV universe, because Marvel's had its TV shows. Can we have nice DC Comics live-action? I know there was Peacemaker, but this was so good. I thought it'd be okay from the trailer. Episode 1 onward, everything was a movie quality thing. I was so impressed. And because there have been other, Shogun is a book adaptation. It was at a famous miniseries before this in the 80s. By a slim margin, I would put The Penguin as series of the year. And not just because it was relatively recent, but in terms of overall quality. And in terms of, it wasn't just the Colin Farrell show. They actually had a pretty good cast throughout. Then you have the Most Improved Season Award. The Most Improved Award blatantly goes to Rings of Power Season 2. I mean, other things that had their ups and downs that were returning shows. I mean, Arcane Season 2 was good, but Season 1 was already good, and Season 2 had a lot of things to juggle. That the Most Improved Season Award only goes to a show that has already had one not-so-great season that recovered from it. And there weren't really that many other things like that this year. That if Mandalorian came out with a season 4 that was better than its first season, I'd be giving it this award. But Most Improved Season, everyone says Rings of Power Season 2, so do I. Even if you still don't like Season 2, critics I've seen who don't like Season 2 grudgingly admit we have to say this was a lot better than Season 1. Biggest positive surprise of the year that we weren't expecting to be really good or great. Now, Penguin I thought would be good, turned out to be great. That isn't that huge of a surprise. But something we thought would be a dud that turned out to be huge, like House of the Dragon Season 1. If you weren't following the filming news, we were getting a good feeling from it. A lot of people thought, the reviewers I saw, like, Angry Joe, were saying this thing's gonna flop and be canceled immediately. And then they saw the first episode and went, wow, this is what it's like when you have other showrunners on this franchise. That House of the Dragon Season 1 was the biggest surprise of 2022. For this year, I think the biggest positive surprise was Dune Prophecy. Because they'd had a revolving door of cast and crew changes behind the scenes. They changed showrunners. I was hoping it would be presentable, and it turned out to be really good. Like, the weakest episode of the season, which is still presentable, is episode 2, which was kind of clunky. I thought the whole season would be like that at best. And even worse at its worst points. No, from the first episode I was hooked in, and by episodes 3 and 4 I was like, wow, this is actually really impressive what they did with Dune Prophecy. Left me encouraged for them going, we will be trying to do other Dune spin-offs after this. TV tie-in things. That was the biggest positive surprise of the year. Biggest negative surprise was, of course, Star Wars The Acolyte. And I'll leave it at that because we could go on at length and others have. Best documentary. I normally wouldn't have a documentary category, but again, I was so impressed with and validated by Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV. And it just mirrors so many other things we face with that the studios are corrupt, issues that led to the writers' strikes. But this is a kids thing, and it's not just Dan Schneider. It's like even stuff he wasn't responsible for, where it's just that the studios are reckless. And no one is calling him account. The media wasn't reporting on it. That they really needed to shine a light onto this. And I'm really just proud of that they were able to get this. And I've watched the other YouTube documentaries that came out years before this. I caught up on them of just the people pointing out how weird Nickelodeon's live-action projects got in the Dan Schneider years. Best documentary, Quiet on Set. I hope we get another hard-hitting documentary like that. Like, in a prior year, I would have gone something like Bad Blood or Firefest in terms of this was a really hard-hitting documentary. Best Video Game Adaptation Award, I would have to say Fallout, which is a bit stronger than Arcane Season 2, which was already set up by Season 1. And again, Season 2 is good, it's just there's so much to cover. I think they did a good job, it's just there's a lot. They barely managed to all fit in and do well. But also that is animated versus this is, and I think even an animated video game adaptation counts as an adaptation, but this is a live action, good adaptation of the Fallout universe. And not just visually, which is hard to pull off because it's got this retro feel, but on top of that, the dark humor of the Fallout games. And Goggins gave it his all with his performance, and Purnell, who was in both Fallout and Arcane, were both big video game adaptations of the year, but in terms of on the balance, the biggest achievement of the year, I'd have to say Fallout Season 1, best video game adaptation. Even though it's like Arcane, neither of them is a straight-up adaptation of a video game narrative the way The Last of Us is. It's a new story set in that universe by the same creators. Best comic book adaptation. There's 3 candidates. X-Men 97, Creature Commandos, and The Penguin. Like I said with video games, an adaptation can be animated or live action, just from one medium to another. Well, Penguin was great, but it wasn't really a direct adaptation. I mean, if we're weighting this category by adaptation, it wasn't adapting a specific storyline. It was inspired by the general universe of the Penguin and borrowed some elements from No Man's Land and things here and there, but it wasn't really a specific adaptation of something. And between X-Men 97 and Creature Commandos is great, but I'm going to have to go with X-Men 97. X-Men 97 was a dream 25 years in the making. This is the show I grew up on. It's not just for nostalgia, it's also, it's a hit for a reason, the original 90s X-Men, that it was a surprising it set a new bar for maturity in animated storytelling with the themes and the darkness of it. That Creature Commandos is a close second to me. The storytelling is amazing, but again, like Penguin, it isn't really adapting a specific comic storyline. The characters aren't one-for-one like this in the Creature Commandos comics. Versus X-Men 97 is skillfully adapting specific pre-existing comic storylines and merging them well, because all the crazy continuity issues. They basically adapted the Operation Zero Tolerance arc, fitting it in with all of these earlier arcs from the earlier animated continuity, and fitted in really well with Bastion and the Prime Sentinels. So in terms of how well as an adaptation, not just in tone, like for comics like Creature Commandos, Penguin, but because it was handling specific storylines, and this is a dream 25 years in the making, that they got most of the original voice cast back, like the original Rogue. It just blows the other stuff away. I loved Creature Commandos. I'm not knocking on that. If you haven't checked it out yet, I'm worried people are overlooking it because it came at the end of the year. I was surprised at how good it was. And it is a compliment to Creature Commandos, this new unproven DC reboot universe. It's the first entry in it, that we can mention Creature Commandos in the same sentence as X-Men 97 is a great praise for a new show. But part of the appeal of X-Men 97 is it was 25 years in the making, and 10 years ago this was pure fantasy. I remember wondering, why don't they just revisit that show? Why not just pick up on it again or make a sequel or something? And they did. So narrowly I'd give that to X-Men 97. What was the best sci-fi or fantasy series? That's kind of hard because most of my things on my list here are sci-fi or fantasy series. That if you're considering Fallout, Boys Season 4, Agatha All Along, and Dune Prophecy as pure sci-fi, I would lean towards Dune Prophecy being the best out of all of them for its achievement in sci-fi. Penguin isn't really sci-fi, even relative to other Batman things. It's a crime noir. It's realistic. It doesn't really count as sci-fi. Even though Dune Prophecy might not have the most consistent quality, like Agatha All Along was very consistently this really fun, light comedy about witches with magic. But in terms of pushing the boundaries of what sci-fi elements can do in a show, explaining backstory things the movies didn't get to, like the Machine Crusades and why they don't have AI, and the genetic memory stuff with Abomination that they didn't really cover that much in the movies yet. In terms of exploring sci-fi concepts, I think Dune Prophecy did better. But that's on the sci-fi end of things. Fallout Boys, Agatha, Dune. And again, should I have a split category for Best Fantasy Series? Well, it would only be a head-to-head between Lord of the Rings and House of the Dragon if I had, well, what was the best fantasy? And I'm thinking of real-life award shows, like the Costume Guild Awards, which are coming up. House of the Dragon is nominated head-to-head against Lord of the Rings and Dune Prophecy, where some other awards separate fantasy from sci-fi as a different category, or period drama. Some awards have best sci-fi fantasy period drama, some separate out period drama. It varies. But given a choice between fantasy shows, like I said, I think that in terms of overall quality, I have to admit, relative to itself, Rings of Power Season 2 is better than House of the Dragon Season 2. And out of the sci-fi crop, Dune Prophecy was better than Fallout to me. So if the best sci-fi was Dune Prophecy, and the best fantasy was Lord of the Rings Season 2, if you've seen both, and in terms of overall quality, put head-to-head in a combined best sci-fi and fantasy category, I know it's six of one, a half a dozen of the other, but I would narrowly give it to Dune Prophecy, despite the handful of inconsistencies in it that you can tell it had rewrites, but they were rewrites for the better. Versus Lord of the Rings was more consistent, but it's still trying to be essentially a PG-13 movie level of maturity, in a good way. It's meant to be hitting a wider audience, the trailers are aimed at families. Dune Prophecy was blatantly the equivalent of an R-rated movie. Again, that whole thing, well, can you really compare them? They weren't trying to be the same as... Lord of the Rings was actually trying to be Lord of the Rings in Season 2. They weren't trying to be Amazon's Game of Thrones anymore, and it was a better show for it. So, tell me in the comments, Dune Prophecy or Lord of the Rings Season 2 head-to-head. Lord of the Rings Season 2 has consistency on its side, and it was a longer season, but I already gave them the Most Improved Season award, so I'll give this one to Dune Prophecy. And Best Comic Adaptation, head-to-head, X-Men 97 or Creature Commandos, I'd have to give that to X-Men 97. But this is an embarrassment of riches that we have all of these shows. I still think best series overall was The Penguin, because it was untested, we didn't know how good it would be. Shogun was a specific literary adaptation that had been adapted before, it was very well done. And it was different than the original one, because this time they just had a lot of subtitled Japanese, and the translation was a major part of the story. But that pretty much wraps up my top shows of the year, and in only about 24 minutes, versus I'm going to be ranting for like a 2-hour live stream podcast on these are my specific thoughts on all the shows of 2024. But this is the quick version. I'm going to make a longer form podcast on what to expect in 2025, and another on what I thought of all of these. So please like and subscribe. I'm going over the year behind us and the year ahead.